Hey everybody, we are Robert, Martin, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey, welcome back. This is Snakes and Otters. I'm Robert.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Francis.
And this is going to be episode 23. We're going to talk about the Roman Republic. Normally, when you think of Rome, we think of the Empire, right? Because that's the big, as they say, as empires go, it's the big one.
That's right.
But really, you can't talk about the Empire without understanding where it came from. If you're going to really, get into it deep like we do, right?
And that's what we're going to do because, just to interrupt you, sir, but this is the first in what we plan to be a series of 4 episodes total on Rome.
That's right. So, the Roman Republic. As I said, most people are going to know the Empire. That's maybe a more familiar thing. But let's talk a little bit about the Republic. So, according to myth, Rome was founded in the 753, 756 BC by Romulus and Remus. Probably, according to the legend, they were raised by a she-wolf, and Romulus killed his brother Remus to become the first king of Rome, of the city, which was named after him, which is Rome. We're pretty sure that's a load of crap, but that's okay.
Every place has to have its myths.
Right. Every place has to have its myths.
Oh, yeah, and they built him up to be almost godlike. In fact, he was said to be the son of Mars, I believe.
Yes.
And because
yes.
Yeah, exactly. And which kind of goes to the fact that they did apparently do something spectacular. So you kind of backdate that to figure out, well, if they were so good and such a great person that was able to do all the things they did, they must have been godlike. So it's kind of like, which came first, chicken or the egg?
Like most myths, there's usually some kernel of truth in it, and that's fine. So presumably, if you go by what historians go by today, there are 7 kings, maybe 9, but 7 is the accepted
Depends on how you count
number.
them,
And after the 7th one, who may or may not have been a total douchebag.
Yeah, that's one of our favorite words.
It is lately,
You've
yes.
noticed that.
After the Wilhelm episode. So he may or may not have been a total douchebag, but they threw him out. They decided, rather than to rely on a monarchy, a hereditary king or an appointed king, they would have consuls, answerable to the Senate, appointed by the Senate, because the kings actually had a Senate.
Well, not appointed.
Elected
by the people.
I thought it was by the Senate.
Nope, you had to run I'm jumping ahead on you a little bit, but it was called the Cursus
Honorum. Elected by the people, but drawn from the Senate.
Yes, only senators were eligible.
Yes. And senators were hereditary, basically. Only a few families were able to do this.
Patrician class.
Patrician class, that's correct. So it's an oligarchy, is what we're talking
very
about
much
here.
so.
Yes.
Even though it is a republic.
Correct.
It is still an oligarchy. But, really, you can make the argument that almost all republics have some form of oligarchy built into them. But that's another thing.
It was a fairly diffuse oligarchy. It's not 10 people. It's
right.
Yeah, it's many families,
several hundred.
And as time goes on and generations expand, the families get larger. So you've got a lot. The Junius family has the Julii are huge. There's tons of them, and there are different ranks amongst them. So over time, it gets bigger and bigger, which is not a bad thing actually.
Yeah. So the Republic starts out as a response to a douchey king.
Yeah, who rapes a girl actually? One of the daughters.
Theoretically,
so it's been said that was the tipping point,
which may not have been true, but whatever it is, he did something really bad.
Yep.
Pissed off a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So they went to this oligarchy type republic where the Senate provides the leaders. So one of the first things that they did was to actually codify certain laws and limits, which is absolutely amazing when you consider this is some 2,500 years ago. This is during a time when even Greece is, in a way, not nearly as sophisticated in how they're approaching
this is
this sort of thing.
510 BC,
right?
2,500 years ago, and they came up with this idea that, in many respects, is very similar to the way we live today.
Yes. So the whole point about doing this was to guarantee certain rights and obligations of those that were in the society. And we talk about Rome, and we talked about this a little bit during the prep. Rome is a people, not necessarily a nation state as we understand it now.
Right. That evolved.
Right. So protections here, when it talks about the people, we talk about it, it's really more the patricians. Although the plebeian caste, the plebes, would not have been totally unprotected. They were not serfs.
They had representation.
Called a
tribune of the plebs.
Right.
So they had protections, and they had the vote.
Right.
More than just patricians could vote. Everybody came to what was called the Campus Martius in Rome and cast their vote.
Right. So very much the Roman Republic begins and has a lot of hallmarks of a society that, at least in the very broad externals and structures, we would recognize today.
Very much so.
As a modern republic.
The terms that we use
come from
are taken from Senate is a Roman word.
Right. And even our structure of the Senate today is very much the way theirs was. It's meant to be an elite body.
Yeah, it is a form of aristocracy. Only what constitutes aristocracy for them was hereditary. Now it's more of a political class. But I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Yes. So, well, originally, the states, they were beholden to the state. So in a way, it was a sort of an aristocracy. It was an aristocracy of our local states, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, because we have direct election of senators. That was not always the case.
Right.
Most people don't realize.
So the first Roman law code was actually inscribed on 12 bronze tablets that they put on display. This is something they were very proud of.
Yes.
Right? And it was meant to be seen so that everybody knew what the law was. There was no whim of the ruler like there was with an absolute rule monarch. Again, this is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that's the very big key of what starts the Roman Republic on a trajectory of dominance throughout history. Is here's a place where you do not live and die by the whims of one person.
Right.
Or a small group of people.
Yeah.
Right. So, these were laws that were about legal procedure, civil rights, and property rights. And these 12 tablets, they provided the basis for all the Roman law that came after it, right?
Yeah.
So, again, not unlike what we see with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and some of the founding documents in our own country. So, granted, there's a lot of differences between our country in the beginning and theirs. There's no doubt. I'm not saying that we're identical. But there are a lot of similarities in what was going on as far as the philosophical side of things, right? Yeah. It wasn't just a revolution that is actually one of the few successful revolutions.
That's right.
And we've talked about that before.
That's right.
Most revolutions eat themselves.
Yeah.
Not
this
eating their young.
The Roman Republic was another example of a successful one because they ruled for 500 years.
Right.
And it was only over time that, and we'll get into this, as to what happened and what changed. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, I would consider the Roman Republic a success. I mean, I think 500 years is good enough.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, it lasted longer than the empire. When you think about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, in the West, anyway.
In the West,
yeah, that's right.
Yes, and we'll
get into that
all
later
that with the next episode. But,
I mean, it was close, but yes, the West.
So it is a successful political entity that eventually would spread even beyond what was at that time the borders of Rome, the city-state, to encompass the Italian peninsula and a large swath of the Mediterranean world.
That's right.
Yes.
And ultimately, in the end, to be by the imperial period, it is the world.
Yes.
It is the known
Pax
world.
Romana is meant to imply that it is Roman peace is spread everywhere. Obviously.
Well, the word Mediterranean is mare antinum, which means our sea. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Well, yes.
It's their sea. So that's good background stuff, but I think it'd be important here, because I know where you want to go, but to talk about how that worked on a practical level, how the Roman Republic as a political entity worked.
Well,
because we talked about the Senate, we talked just a tiny bit about the offices, but I think it's important to go into that, to give that idea of what this was really like.
Are you meaning the Cursus Honorum?
Yes, I think it's important to talk about the Cursus Honorum, some of the offices, and how someone progressed through them.
go ahead. I think you can probably no.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean,
well, the Cursus Honorum, when a member of one of these patrician families decided to undertake a political career, That's what it was called. You would enter into the Cursus Honorum, and
it was a very specific mode of. I mean, it's like it's hoops. Literally, it's hoops.
Yes.
There are.
It's junior offices, things like I think it's called Aedile and Praetor
and Questor and a Tribune, and I'm not giving them in order. That's correct because I don't have all that in front of me.
So there's junior offices. The one you're working towards, though, is consul.
Yeah, which is ultimately head of state.
Co-head of state.
Co-head of state. And
you're not alone.
That's how
right.
they balanced it out. Was you weren't supposed to be consul by yourself. There was always a pair, and they served for 1 year.
1 year, which is outrageous from our perspective today.
It's like, how do you get anything done?
How do you get anything done? Well, that is the point.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to get stuff done. You're just supposed to make sure nothing breaks. And if they need you, they'll let you do it. That's what we don't understand about the Roman Republic is we see supreme executive power, to quote Monty Python, as being the point here. It was not. There's no strong executive here. Executives, basically, they are in charge of the army. They're in charge of the defense.
Yes. And
that's about it. There's no.
They could propose legislation into the Senate. That became part of how they got votes.
Right.
Is what are you promising? Just like any politician.
That's correct. But ultimately,
you've got to go to the electorate and say, well, and there weren't like parties or factions kind of as we know it now.
Well, there were multiple. There were factions, yes.
They kind of developed
but they
over
were familial in many ways, and they were relational in many ways.
Yeah.
Basically, it's an alliance system. I suppose you could like it to Survivor. That sooner or later, everybody has to get enough. You have to build enough alliances and not piss off enough people to order to get your thing. And the beauty of this is there's constantly a new one every year, so there's plenty for everybody.
Yeah,
so you don't have to worry about cutting the throat, and this is the beauty of the system. You don't have to cut the throat of the other guy. You just want it now, and he can have his later. And that prevents a lot of the absolute warfare that only later happens, and that's where the system breaks down.
There's a cookie at the end.
That's right for everybody.
So
unfortunately, things go off the rails. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. So one of the interesting things you're talking about how this is set up. It's the federal system that we have today. Is the way it was originally, the way the federal system was intended to be meant. That it wasn't supposed to be there to do a whole lot of stuff. It was be there to make sure things don't go wrong, to take care of things at the big level.
Provide for the common defense.
And not be there forever.
And not be there forever.
Yeah. You would move through the Cursus Honorum, moving up in offices, take your turn at consul, and then you would pass out of it, giving someone else a try.
And this is baked into the Roman culture from the very, very beginning. Yes. It's partially anti-monarchical, but it's also something that has been valued all throughout. All their myths and legends. The legend of Cincinnatus is the big one. They made him dictator during a crisis, which basically is supreme executive power, but for 6 months. You can do whatever you need to.
Dictator was a special office.
When necessary.
Was not only there, and not there all the time, but the Senate could appoint someone dictator, and the term was supposed to end at 6 months. Cincinnatus lasted 16 days.
That's right. He came, he did what he needed to do, he solved the crisis and went back to his farm. And that has been elevated in the Roman culture. That is one of their great founding myths, because they're trying to teach their young, you don't need to be chief executive. Yeah, you don't need to be in charge.
Yes,
take your turn.
It's about dedication to the state, and then you move on.
The state being the people.
That is correct. I know you don't like that word because it doesn't.
It's a loaded word in our world today.
Right.
That's
why it means something different for us than they would have considered.
Right.
Yes. Context is very different.
And then, because when you think about it, it was about the people that those first sets of laws. Now, granted, like many civilizations, the protections that are built into laws when they get made often are about those who already have power and wealth.
Right.
Within a couple of hundred years, by about 300 BC, all the power is pretty much centered in the Senate. There may still be elections, but you still have to choose your leaders from the Senate.
You have to go through the Senate to get the
Senate is going to be those patrician families and wealthy plebeian families. So you may have plebes that are going to be part of the Senate, those tribunes, but they're going to be the wealthy ones anyways who already wield influence. And that sets the stage, I think, for what eventually starts both the meteoric rise and the ultimate downfall of the Republic, because that tends to be a very centralized power structure. When you centralize the power structure like that, which in a way is very antithetical to the whole point of the Republic, that's when I think the ambitions start to grow.
Yeah.
And that's when they start looking for places to conquer and to expand. And I think what even really precipitated this was about 90 years prior to that, when Gaul sacks the city.
Right.
So the Gauls come in
Yep.
and they sack and burn Rome. And when they rebound, it's under a military hero. And that's kind of what starts setting that up. So I think that military influence comes into play. And this is not unlike what we've seen, not just in our own country, but in other places where when you have to have a military response for something, it tends to be a very popular thing when you win. Therefore, a lot of prestige is attached to it. And it's one of those things where, wow, that's a really cool thing. Maybe I'd like to do that too. So it doesn't quite become self-perpetuating, but it's that glory there is an awful big pull.
Oh, and you cannot underestimate the value of the fact of having an enemy to fight all the time. Keeps you from worrying about trying to take control at home. Because Rome, the Roman Republic, was almost constantly at war.
Yes.
In an escalating fashion. It starts out, because you think about it, the more you conquer, the larger you get, the more that you need, the more that you're a problem for your neighbors. And Rome exported itself very well. That's something that we forget a lot about is Rome, one of its great geniuses is it would conquer, it would bring its own ways, but it would also absorb the ways of the conquered people, take what it saw as good. It had the vision to do that and remake itself.
After beating Greece, they came to have a huge appreciation for Greek history, literature,
Absolutely.
Everything.
And Etruscans even before that, because they had an extremely developed... Rome was basically a bunch of bullies on the Tiber until they conquered and absorbed the Etruscans, saying, wait a minute, these guys knew how to paint and do sculpture and write stuff. We like that. Let's do that. And that's kind of what starts the ball rolling. The more, as you said so very clearly, they are the Borg.
They're the Borg.
Yes, they assimilate.
And to kind of go back to where I wanted to go with this episode, again, a parallel with what you see with the United States. Now, you can certainly make an argument that when we expanded across this continent, we did not absorb, we overran and nearly wiped out the
marginalized. Yes.
Yeah.
But that's not where I want to draw the parallel.
Yeah.
Our cultural impact across the world as we have become a superpower is more akin to what the Romans did. You'll find a McDonald's in every country. I think they even have McDonald's in Saudi Arabia. Probably not the same menu, but
right. And to parallel, there was a Roman road.
Yes,
everywhere. All roads led to Rome. That's not an accident.
McDonald's is the modern day Roman road. Wow. Okay.
Well,
I'm liking that.
Yeah. But you're right. There's a ton of values and virtues to the Roman Republic that I think we hope to see in ourselves. Determination, a sense that we can make things right.
We know how to do it better.
There's a right and wrong. There's
right and wrong, and we're pretty sure this is right. But we're willing to be educated if you can show us better.
And
that's valuable.
One of the things that fascinates me about the Republic period in Rome and what made them the rulers of the Mediterranean is the conflict with Carthage. Carthage is
critical because that was really the apex point.
Yes, Carthage is a city-state in North Africa.
Was
essentially the same sort of place as Rome. It's a city-state.
It's a natural rival.
Yeah, and it's right across in North Africa, right across from the Italian peninsula.
They're more economically powerful than Rome is in many ways because they are more navally based. And they're traders. They're Phoenician descendants, basically.
Yes,
so
yes, it is.
There's a cultural difference. There's also an ideological difference, which inevitably puts the two together because it's kind of like this town ain't big enough for the both of us.
Yeah, it is.
This ocean ain't big enough for both of us.
Yeah, it's a classic that kind of Western. This ocean's not. That's very well put. The ocean's not big enough for both of us. But what happens? They come into conflict, and Rome is essentially beaten. They're in trouble.
You speak in the First Punic War.
Yes. And the normal course in the ancient world is once you are beaten and lose a battle, hey, let's get into a peace treaty. Let's negotiate.
Yeah.
What do you want to leave us alone? Rome did not take that avenue.
No.
They just basically stalled until they could rebuild.
Right.
A senator named Cicero would walk in to make speeches in the Senate, and no matter what the speech was about, at the end of that speech, he said, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. So it's that Roman determination that we're not going to say no, we're not going to give in, eventually leads to their success. They overcome Carthage, and they are the masters then of the Mediterranean world. And that's to me is that pivotal episode that leads to that meteoric rise, and why we remember Rome and why we pull so much of the modern world from Rome and not places like Carthage or Phoenicia or any place else or Athens.
Yeah.
I mean, we all look to Athens as the primogenitor of democracy, but for our system, it really is Rome.
It is. It's right.
So one of the interesting, you talk about the struggle with Carthage. It's really about 100 years that this goes on.
Oh yeah. Yes.
So it's really a small portion.
Three actual definitive wars.
Right.
And during this long,
it is during this
hot and cold conflict.
300 years between, actually more like 150 years from when they start getting really militaristic to the end of the war with Carthage. Because by that time, the Mediterranean is theirs. And I think that's when they start looking to the rest of Europe. Because remember, the Alps is still a barrier.
Yes. Eventually they overcome that as well.
They overcome that as well. I mean, of course, they've already, they're in Spain, and through there they get involved.
Because Carthage owned Spain. And when you destroy Carthage, you just basically come in and say, hey, we're the new landlords here. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
During all this time, they have conquered Macedonia, which is Philip's realm. He's one of the heirs to Alexander the Great.
Which is its own irony, because Alexander, had he turned west instead of east, everything would have been very different.
Yes.
He was the one that was irreplaceable. Everybody else was much less than he. They divide themselves up and make them ripe for Rome to come in and say, we've got this.
Yeah. So they go through all this, and I think it creates an appetite for more in the society.
Yes.
Because with every conquering brings more wealth to the city.
Yes.
Because you sack the wealth of wherever you conquer.
Yes.
By the time they're done with Carthage, it's around 145 BC, give or take a little bit. They've pretty much gotten, like I said, all of the Mediterranean under control.
Because they didn't just beat Carthage.
Yeah. They destroyed it.
They eliminated
at the
Carthage.
end, they sow the ground with salt. Literally, that's where the idea comes from. That's what they
Sowing the ground
did.
with salt and sold all the inhabitants into slavery.
Yeah, because this was the third time, and it's third time's the charm. Fool me once, fool me twice. No, not again.
You can say, I'm a descendant of the Romans, or I'm a descendant of the Greeks. Nobody can really say I'm a there the Carthaginians. Because there is no more Carthage.
Why would you want to?
Well, yes.
Because they lost.
They lost. But in that 100 years, that last 100 years, is what sets the stage for the downfall of the Republic.
You're so right.
Once they have that absolute control of their immediate surroundings, that's when they start going up into France, which is known as Gaul at the time.
Yeah.
Eventually they get into the Germanies after they become an empire. And, refill Francis's glass there with a little bit of the Elijah Craig.
Elijah Craig's what we're doing.
That is
today.
our bourbon of choice for this episode.
Listeners, I hope you've heard the...
Yeah, we'll pour a little bit more for everybody. Just a little dash there, make sure.
That's good.
I'm good.
Because you're talking so much, you haven't drank as fast as the rest of us, that's for sure.
Elijah Craig is our bourbon of choice for this episode.
Yeah, a little clink of the glass.
Should we also mention our special recording location?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, we're on location this time, yeah.
On location. We are in the Archabbey of St. Meinrad in
Southern Indiana.
Southern Indiana.
Beautiful, beautiful place.
My gosh.
And I'm so thrilled to be recording here, and they're thrilled to have us.
Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Martin's never been here. Now, Robert and I have many times. And it is a beautiful location. The Holy Hill, as they call it up here. So
even if you just want to come up just to enjoy the peace and quiet and the surroundings, doesn't matter. You don't have to be Catholic to do it. It is just that wonderful of a place.
Yeah, and we're grateful for their hospitality.
Yes,
very much so.
Very grateful, and I was amazed to hear that they were just
excited to have us.
Excited, like, you're going to do what? Record a podcast? Yeah, awesome.
That's right.
So that's
yes, they
amazing.
provided us a nice conference room. That's where we're recording from. We're going to head over to the church for evening prayer in a little while. Take a tour of the campus. Just have all kinds of fun here tonight.
That's right.
So, back to this last bit here. Is we're coming up in the last 10 minutes or so of the episode. So let's, I think, kind of pull it around.
Yeah, because I got some place I want to go with where you're going.
So I've outlined, and as well as you guys have, we've outlined some parallels to our own political structure, our own political history. Because I think you can see with us some parallels, even with the expansion of our own culture into the world, how it has become very dominant. I mean, even in Japan, which is one of the most homogenous countries and societies in the entire world, loves American culture.
They've been thoroughly Americanized.
Maybe not thoroughly, but pretty darn close.
Well, I mean, not to the exclusion of all else.
Yeah, not like Canada.
Right, that's right. But they have embraced it and they love it, and there's a goodness of that, and that's exactly what Rome was famous for doing.
Yes.
The reason that people didn't generally revolt is because they realized, this trading partners, we're getting nice stuff. Our standard of living goes way up, and we have the protections of Roman citizenship, which is a big deal. Because our neighbors won't give us anything like this. They'll just cut our throats.
And you could travel from North Africa, the Middle East, to Britain on Roman roads.
That's right. Safely.
And travel.
Relatively, yeah. That's right.
So that very much is very similar to how the United States became a world power and has spread our culture. Now, we have not always done it through conquering, because in the sense that we went out to conquer. We have, obviously spread it through a lot.
Cultural conquering, not military conquering.
Well, I mean, there is some with the military conquering. Through World War II, we spread a lot of our influence across Europe and Asia.
Japan being the obvious example.
Yeah, yes. I mean, we bombed Japan and Germany flat and remade them in our own image.
Right.
And they liked it.
Well,
that's what's generally speaking.
To
a degree,
It wouldn't have stayed to the extent that it has if it wasn't in some way beneficial to them.
Right. So, but in that, we have also developed especially the last 20 years or so, it seems, really you can go even farther than that, but since, really you could probably go to World War II. I mean, it's not every year since World War II have we been involved in a military action, but damn if it's not most of them,
Every decade seems to have.
And every decade has definitely had some. Now, granted, during the 80s, it was Grenada, so it wasn't, that was relatively active conflict free. It's because it's really hard to count Grenada. I mean, that was like 5 minutes, and the last guy off the boat was like, "What? We're done already?" That's how tiny and fast that one was. But relatively speaking, though, we have become, and I don't say this necessarily totally negatively, but the parallels are somewhat alarming in some ways.
Yeah,
where the military power and the exercise thereof has become very prominent and preeminent.
Yeah. And there's a parallel development as well that I think is important to understand, in that the Romans in the late Republic period became very competitive with each other.
Yes.
That's right. There was a rise of a political class.
Yes. And it became ever more cutthroat to get into this Cursus Honorum and get to the top of it as a consul. And just like in modern politics, that takes money.
There it is.
And it became very important to have the money you needed to run a race for all of these offices. And
essentially, you had to buy it.
Yeah, you had to pay up to run for all of them. So by the time you would get deep into this track, you owed people a lot of money.
Lots of favors.
Lots of favors, lots of loans, and lots of money. So the cookie at the end of being consul was the Senate then appointed you to go to a province to govern it.
Right.
And
proconsul.
What happened was you hoovered up everything in sight so that you could pay these loans off.
Right.
Assuming you wanted to come back at all.
Yes.
Yes, conquered provinces did not do as well as those that were actually incorporated into the Republic.
So,
and later the Empire.
Of course, the key thing then is a competitor could then wait until you returned to Rome from this province, because you were untouchable when you were in the province. It was called having Imperium. But once you were scheduled to leave the province and come back to Rome, you had to lay down Imperium. And a rival could accuse you of nearly anything.
Right. And if they had the support, it's not a question of burden of proof or anything like that.
There's no evidence.
Support.
It's just, can you out-talk them in the Senate? Because there's no separate judiciary.
That's critical. We haven't talked about that.
Yeah.
The Senate was both judiciary and legislative branch. In fact, it's
and administrative.
And administrative, too.
Yeah,
That's
it's
correct.
everything.
It's everything.
So that became the danger.
Yes.
There's this huge cookie at the end, all this glory, all of this service to Rome, to the Roman people, to the Roman Senate. But the danger is all a rival has to do is accuse you of something and get you before the Senate and
take you down.
If they have the votes in the Senate to convict, you could lose everything.
And this is why I think the military aspect is so important here. Both modern day is, modern day it's a little bit more difficult to do this sort of thing, but I mean, the military is still very important in both cases. But for them, when you have a case of somebody like Julius Caesar and those just before him, with Pompey and Sulla and all of the stuff that goes on there, Crassus, this is all still during the Republic. And Pompey and Caesar, Julius Caesar, are incredibly popular, both as political figures, but also as generals, because Caesar conquers Gaul for Rome, and his men, they do very well. Yes. They do very well.
The
with
legions
spoils.
are very loyal to the individual commanders by this point, which they're supposed to be loyal to the Senate and to the people of Rome.
SPQR is Senatus Populus Quae Romanum. It's Senate and people of Rome.
Yep.
And that
I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's that's the intention. You're supposed to be loyal there. And that changes because it requires so much money. And, of course, as you conquer, you get more power and both popular and military
the legislation
and financially.
That these guys what they wanted to do when they got to be consuls is introduce legislation to give land to these veterans.
Yes.
So they're cultivating that loyalty as well.
Right, because if you become landed, you immediately become eligible for the Senate, because you become part of a class that is
land is then as it is now. It's an important asset.
Right. It was more important then than it is now, because that's what wealth was tied up in. So you have set the stage by the end of the Republic. By the time you get to this, to where political power is fiercely fought over on the civil side. Then you've got this dangerous political power that resides in these generals with these legions that are very loyal to them.
And they've always been taught up to this point that the legions are separate. You leave them behind.
Yes.
Because the state, I know you don't like the word, but the entity,
you have to lay down.
Well,
your
Rome is still. They said it great in the movie Spartacus. Most Romans think of this. Rome is like a rich widow. Most Romans think of her like our mother. However, Crassus wants to marry the old gal, to put it politely. That's where it starts.
And Crassus is the loan. He's the banker.
Yeah, exactly. And it's from him. In many respects, he's one of the true, sometimes forgotten linchpins, because if it weren't for him, Pompey and Caesar would have never reached the heights that they reach.
And they had to have gotten their start somewhere.
That's exactly right.
The three of them formed what was called the First Triumvirate. I think Pompey and Caesar served as the consuls.
That's right.
Yes.
But they basically ran everything they wanted to do through Crassus,
who was the money
because
man.
he funded both of their campaigns.
Right. So that's going a little bit beyond where we want to be.
Go ahead.
So to me, Rome is fascinating for all the parallels and similarities, but also for the lessons we should draw from where it went.
Yes, you're so right.
Because ultimately it fell and it transformed and morphed into something very different.
Now, I don't know that can. I don't think we could devolve into something like the Roman Empire, but things could still go wrong, and who knows what that would look like, because you still have some of the same situations. You've got the political class is so terribly divided today, like it was back then. Right. It's probably even worse today than it was then, because truly it is evil versus good. no matter which side you're on, the other side is
The other
evil.
side
That's
is
exactly
evil.
right. You don't
It's
make
not just a disagreement.
We talked
anymore.
about this with Wilhelm. You don't make a deal with the devil. You
Right.
must destroy them.
And you can't
that's where
admit
we've gotten.
That's where we are.
And sooner
Right.
or later, things are going to escalate, like they did with Rome, to the point where somebody's going to do something that destroys the other side. And that's problematic.
That's uncharted territory for this
right.
country.
right.
Because
Well, never
that's the
had
whole
that.
point of the Republic
such
is
a great
to have a lawful and a smooth transition of power. That was, because if you think about it, almost every war in modern history, going back to Rome, is going to be about either the acquisition of land or the transfer of power, which in a way, the acquisition of land is the same thing. Transfer of power from the old owners to the new owners, or from one son of a king to another son of a king.
Which is basically what Caesar did. He decided, I'm not giving up my power. I'm crossing
Yes.
the Rubicon. And it's become
That's
part of our
why
language.
we have that phrase.
That's where it came from. And that's exactly what happened is, at this point...
It's a declaration of war
That's right.
on Rome.
The transfer
to
of
cross the
power,
Rubicon.
Caesar decided, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
And for his own reasons, because he knew it would be his death or destruction. Because things had escalated that far.
But if he still held to the ideals, the values
That's
that
right.
Rome was founded on, he would have fallen on his sword.
That's right. He would have had to.
So they lost their values, which again is another thing that is a great lesson. We have lost our values.
Yeah.
We no longer have
You're
common
so
values.
Right. You're so right. These things are such lessons. They're not ancient history. It's not some dry, dusty
yes.
thing. It's a lesson for the modern world.
Yeah.
History may not repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Caesar basically gave up the very thing that made Rome great to begin with. The
Now,
values
it's not
that
to
they
say
had.
that it wasn't great in other ways, but it was also evil in other ways.
Oh, sure.
Eventually.
Yeah.
All right, so we're at 40 minutes. Anything we want to wrap up? Because, I mean, I hate to wrap up on a downer.
No, but I think it'd be important to talk about some of the great books
Oh, yeah.
that I'll just mention. I've mentioned Tom Holland before.
Yeah,
Love his
he's your
stuff.
guy, yeah.
His new one is coming out, Dominion. But his original is Rubicon, and it
covers all
about
this.
Caesar crossing the Rubicon because he would not lay down his Imperium because he knew he'd fallen out with Pompey and he was going to be accused in the Senate of wrongdoing and have to probably lose in the Senate.
Right.
And I'll just mention also Adrian Goldsworthy, our other favorite.
Absolutely, one of my favorites, very much so.
Caesar, Life of a Colossus. One of his early books, but really the one that makes his reputation. And we've also mentioned in the past Goldsworthy's Punic War.
Punic Wars is the one that's on my shelf. Yeah, it's
a tremendous...
Goldsworthy is very scholarly in his approach, but he's also very detailed on that.
Yeah.
And he has insights into things. It's not just dry facts. He pulls them all together in a very compelling way. Those two guys are probably the leading scholars in this period, I would say. Certainly
Goldsworthy almost certainly is. He's
Yeah.
he's basically right now the number one Roman scholar, and that's pretty much what he writes about. He's written Pax Romana. He's written one on Antony and Cleopatra.
Yeah. He's one that's
it's
worth, no matter what he
his
writes,
thing.
he's worth picking up.
Yeah, Holland's a little more varied. He's gone into some other stuff, but he connects those dots very well. Now you've got some though that you like a great deal.
We're getting a little. Probably the best book, if you can find it, on this entire period is by Chris Scarr. It's called Chronicle of the Roman Emperors. Goldsworthy was an advisor on that. And it is a year-by-year, consul by consul, blow by blow, full of pictures of the whole thing.
Now, is it just emperors, or does that include the Roman?
That's up. No, the Chronicle of Chronicle of the Roman Republic.
There we
That's
go.
right. Excuse me, Philip Matizak. Chris Scarr did one on the Roman emperors, which is like volume 2 of that.
Right, that's next month.
That's next month. That's right. Yeah, it's really does. It makes this accessible, but I still think one of the very best of all time is the great scholar Edith Hamilton from the 30s. She wrote the book The Roman Way, and a lot of what we've stolen here about the Roman virtues and Roman understandings,
That determination. We will not be defeated.
We will not be defeated. The state comes first. You're willing to give up for the state. All those things. She was one of the first to articulate that long, long ago, and her books are still some of the very best. They're used in classrooms even today. She's one of the best. If you can find them, they're worth reading.
All good stuff. All
That's
very
great.
good stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's lots of lessons for us to take from Rome. I don't think that we've gone so far we can't come back, but I do worry that not heeding these lessons that we haven't so far means that it's going to take something really disastrous to avoid the worst of what happened to Rome, because there's just so much that is similar. We haven't even talked about the economic divide between those in the lower class and those that held some kind of power.
Yeah.
That started during this latter period.
That's right. Yeah,
got worse during the Empire.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic for the Empire. It's going to come.
All of these seeds are there for its ultimate destruction. Rome is a political entity, although you can make the argument Rome as a political entity went on until the 1400s because the Empire was still alive in the East.
Yeah.
But for the Rome that we think about, it only had a few more centuries after it became an empire.
Well, I think there's some truth to the fact that the codes and values of Rome as a republic were in the West. The East had their own codes, their own values. They may have been a political successor to them, but they thought very differently.
Yeah, that's probably
it became basically a Greek empire.
That is correct, and that's why
which
I
is
think
odd because they consider themselves the true Romans, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Even though they spoke Latin and were based
and eventually would abandon Latin for Greek, though.
Well, that was partially a religious thing too, but yes, they went back to the Greek. But yes, they consider themselves to be the true Romans, which I always find fascinating. Yeah. So that's it on the Republic for now. I mean, we could go on and on. Because, as republics go, it's the big one.
That's right, yeah. And we'll continue this in our next episode where we talk historical episode.
Next historical
which
episode.
is next month. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to transition out of the Republic and into the Imperial period.
Right, and that will be on, that will be December 6th. Rome, as empires go. This is the big one. That'll be the title of that one.
Keep telling that joke. That's good.
That's right. Next week is episode 24. It's our first Code of Honor episode, Favorite Words of Wisdom, and that'll be on November 8th next week.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.